Hello, everyone. This lesson today on parliamentary procedure is on writing minutes of meetings, what goes in, what stays out, and what you should do about them. Just some organizational information. This is sponsored by a group called the Cascading E-Unit. It's organized within the National Association of Parliamentarians, and it's also associated with the Oregon Association of Parliamentarians. And the intention of this is to provide a way to study parliamentary procedure in Oregon outside of the Portland metro area. Membership options, if you would like to join, is you can become a member, and all you need to do to become a member is take a qualifying quiz, and that allows you to be an official member of this group and also of the National Association of Parliamentarians. You can be a provisional member, which you can do without passing the quiz. And it allows you to attend meetings. Our next meeting is coming up on August 9th, and we will have a regular unit meeting, and then we will have about 45 minutes of practice with questions from the registration exam, so you get a feel about what the questions are and delve into some of the nuances of the topics that we'll be discussing. If you find the dues prohibitive, there's scholarships available. There's a nominal fee to join the Cascade E-Unit. The fees for the National Association of Parliamentarians is prorated. The president of the Oregon Association of Parliamentarians has offered scholarships to anyone to join, so the fees are not a barrier. Any current member of the National Association of Parliamentarians can administer exams. So wherever you are in Oregon, we can find someone nearby for you to help you with that. We have 2 exams scheduled in the Portland area coming up. One is this coming Friday on July 27th, and the next one is on August 21st, if you'd like to be in a room to take your exam with your fellow examinees. To sign up for joining the association or for exams, go to pdpo.org, or you can send a message to me, Larry, at uphillmedia.org. On the reference material, on the next slide, there are 2 books that are really helpful for you. The one on the right is Robert's Rules of Order in Brief, and that contains 80% of the information you should need to participate in meetings and act like you know what you're doing. And also, there's enough information in there for you to pass the exam. The book on the left is the current edition of Robert's Rules of Order, which is the 11th edition. At this point, you might just want to wait until September, because on September 8th, the 12th edition will be released, and it will replace all the previous versions used in meetings. So that'll become the official reference guide to parliamentary procedure under Robert's Rules beginning September 8th. Also looks like there's a Kindle edition available for the 12th edition, which has not happened in previous editions. So that's pretty exciting. 21st century.
I'm very excited about that. And e-edition, finally. It only took 20 years into the 21st century. Okay, that's good. All right.
At least the century's not over.
This is true.
So today's topic is about minutes. It's chapter 15 in the 11th edition, page 468. So starting with the first slide, the minutes definition is that it is the official record of the proceedings of a deliberative assembly, and those are called the minutes. And minutes should contain mainly a record of what was done at the meeting, not what was said by the members. I've worked with secretaries that thought that the discussion that went on during the meeting needed to be captured so that we knew the arguments that people were posing for and against things that were being considered. Those are not needed. What you really need to know in minutes is what the decisions were and what the wording was of the minutes or of the motions that were passed, so you know exactly what had done. In addition, the minutes should never reflect the secretary's opinion or on anything said and done. The minutes should be kept in a substantial book or binder. So presumably at the end of the secretary's term of office, he should be able to bring a binder with written copies of the minutes and hand them to their successor. And hopefully there is a way to keep these electronically. In this day and age, we're finding that Google Documents is a great way to keep things handy and available because you never have to worry about backups. So on contents of minutes, there's a couple of sections of the minutes, and so in the first paragraph of minutes, you should have the kind of meeting it is, and there's 3 kinds that are listed. There's a regular meeting, which is your regularly scheduled meeting. There's special meetings, which are meetings called to deal with a special topic, or there's an adjourned meeting, which is a meeting that's a continuation of a previously scheduled meeting. It's important to note what type of meeting it is because it has relevance on how things were handled. You should have the name of the assembly. You should have the date, time, and place of the meeting. In the case of the Cascadia E unit, those meetings will always be virtual, so we would just say that they were a virtual conference call. And then you should have the name of the chairperson and the secretary or their substitutes, who's ever filling those roles for that meeting. And then the first thing you should note is whether or not the prior meeting minutes were approved. And John, feel welcome to butt in if anyone is posing questions.
I will do so. We have Jay and hi Jay, and Real is here. Barbara is here, and 7 people total. So welcome everybody. If you have questions, just hit me up in the chat, and I will stop Larry and we'll ask him nicely.
On the contents of the minutes, the body of the minutes, this is the next slide, should contain a separate paragraph for each subject matter and show all main motions. And in that paragraph, it would be the wording in which each motion was adopted. And this is not a rough interpretation of the language. This is the exact language that was used. And as we talked previously about this, the best way to ensure this is to have the maker of the motion hand the written motion to the chair or the secretary so they can transpose it into the minutes. And then you should record how the motion was dispositioned. So the motion can be passed, it can be defeated, it can be tabled, it can be amended. There's a number of things that can happen to motions, and it's those are the things that you want to capture in the minutes, not what people said about the motion. Other things that you need to capture, and this is on the next slide, secondary motions that were not lost or withdrawn. So if there's a motion, so a secondary motion is something like, I would like to change the admission price for the picnic from $10 to $25. That would be a secondary motion. And then you would note whether or not it was passed or if someone had withdrawn it. The complete substance of oral committee reports. This is if a chair or chair of the program committee is giving an oral report, you would note the substantive items that were mentioned. All notices of motions. So if your bylaws have a provision that, like all bylaws, changes have to be mentioned in the prior meeting, this is where that would happen. And then all points of order and appeals, whether sustained or lost, together with the reasons given by the chair for their ruling.
I just want to jump in and say hey to Barbara and Jay again. And Jay made a comment. I said this election has become very educational, which is very true for many of us. And Barbara said, yeah, we should have had this stuff in public schools, which is also true. So I want to thank you, Larry, for teaching us all this stuff. And an example, what I saw in the Democratic Party was an example of this the substance of oral committee reports. Every meeting, the treasurer got up and said, here's how much money we had, here's what we spent, and here's how much money we had left, right? And that needs to be recorded so that the next time, if there's a discrepancy, you can see it. All right. Just an example. Yeah. All right, go on. Thank you,
Larry. The next slide is the contents of the last paragraph. It should state the hour the meeting was adjourned. And so there's additional things that you should have. You should have the name of the maker of the main motion. So if I move that the Clatsop County Democrats have a booth at the state fair, then I should be noted as the maker of that motion. You do not need the name of the person seconding it. You often see time wasted trying to track down whoever seconded. All you need to do is note that it was seconded. What would happen if it wasn't seconded is that the motion would die unless it came from a committee in which it would be put forward. The name of the guest speaker can be given, but no effort should be made to summarize their remarks. So they're just a guest speaker speaking on some topic, but they're not there to conduct business. So that's why you don't need to include that in the minutes itself. And then the signature, the minutes should be signed by the secretary, and if the assembly wishes, the president. So this is all taken verbatim out of a book that is now 10 years old, and it doesn't really talk about electronic signatures, but there are ways of tracking and doing electronic signatures if you don't have the ability to actually, get a physical signature on it. There's always the possibility that you could print the minutes and then sign them and then scan them back in, which would fulfill this requirement. On the next slide, reading and approval of the minutes. So the minutes of the meeting are normally read and approved at the beginning of the next regular meeting, immediately after the call to order and any opening ceremonies. So our opening ceremonies are things like doing the flag salute, but again, the first thing that should happen is the approval of the prior meeting minutes. If you were called to a special meeting does not approve minutes, its meetings would be approved at the next regular meeting. So what this means is if you have a special meeting and then you have another special meeting, you wouldn't approve the minutes of the first special meeting at the second special meeting. You would wait till the next regular meeting in order to do that. And the reason why, so let's next talk about corrections of the minutes and then why you would want to do that. So in the corrections and approval of the minutes are normally done by unanimous consent. This makes something that's usually a routine process fairly quick and painless. So the chair would say something like, everyone should have received a copy of the minutes from the last meeting. If there are no corrections, I propose that we approve these by unanimous consent. And if no one objects, then you can move on. If you have found something wrong with the minutes, then you say, I object, and then they're not approved by unanimous consent by definition, and then you get an opportunity to correct the minutes. Corrections, when proposed, are usually handled by unanimous consent, but if any member objects to a proposed correction, the usual rules governing consideration of amendments to a main motion are applicable, because that's really what this is. You have the secretary moving adoption of the minutes, and they are under consideration, and you have found something that's wrong. So the two cases here are where someone has noted that, oh, the date is incorrect. We met on the 23rd, not the 24th. And everyone goes, yeah, that's right. And no one objects. And so those are the kinds of things that you can approve by unanimous consent. The case where there's not agreement on something that happened is where you have to then rely upon the memory of those present. So we had a very interesting situation a couple of years ago in which a bylaws change for the Democratic Party of Oregon bylaws was brought up for consideration at the third quarter meeting. No one had recollection of it being mentioned at the second quarter meeting, which is a requirement. And in the draft minutes of the second quarter meeting, there was also no mention of the bylaws. And so, but someone had gone in and added the mention of the bylaws change to the minutes between the issuing of the draft and the proposal of the minutes at the next meeting. So this brought up a lot of issues and had a lot of things clarified for us that were frankly alarming. Excuse me. Clearly, something wasn't followed. We checked around. No one could remember at the second quarter meeting this item being mentioned. And in Robert's rules, it says if you are proposing a bylaws change, the exact wording of the bylaws change has to be there, which makes total sense because you can convey the intent of a change with a summary, but you need to really know the words that are being used in the proposed bylaws amendment. And the reason why you do notice at the prior meeting is so people who are kind of on the fence about attending a meeting, it's like, oh, it's summertime and we would really plan to go on a camping trip that weekend. If someone has proposed a serious change to the bylaws to which you object, then you might want to change your plans and then go and participate in the discussion. So if something is disagreed upon, like when they proposed the prior minutes and they included language on something that no one can remember a discussion, then you would do the amendment. I move that we strike the language regarding the bylaws change in the third paragraph because that discussion didn't happen. Someone else would have to second it, and then you would rely upon all of the members in attendance to recollect what they remembered about that. And then when the discussion is finished, the chair should take a vote. And if no one can remember that happening, then they should strike that from the prior meeting minutes, and then it would not be valid to discuss that bylaws change at the current meeting, because as far as the minutes are concerned, which is the official record of what transpired in the meeting, that discussion on the proposed bylaws change had not occurred. So I hope that is clear. But this is where you have to really, really watch what's going on, because as long as we've elected great leadership and they can be trusted and everyone's playing above board and they're not doing anything underhanded, then great. We all get trusting and lax in our oversight and our duties as members of assemblies. But it changes significantly when you start having leadership that tries to pull tricks on you. And this particular change affected who voted for the members, 3 of the members that Oregon sends to the Democratic National Committee. And it probably affected the outcome of 2 of the 3 for sure, if not all 3. So this bylaws change ended up being significant, even though it had been pitched in the meeting as something that was not significant or important.
Wow, that's scary. That's scary. And I just want to point out to everybody in the audience who's listening that if this is happening in the DPO, this is happening all across the country. I mean, think about all the little pieces of fuckery that are going on like this. It's frightening.
So the next couple of slides, I have some examples of minutes, and these are not as they would appear on the page. I just took the language itself out and put it into the presentation. But really, this is all that is required in a set of minutes. So it starts out, the regular meeting of the Cascadia unit was held on Thursday, July 12th, 2008 at 7 p.m. as a virtual electronic meeting, the president being in the chair and the secretary being present. The minutes of the last meeting were read and approved as corrected. So that's all you need to meet the initial requirements of minutes. Let's go to the next slide. Usually one of the first things on the agenda is the treasurer's report. So the note of that is the treasurer reported receipt for office products in the amount of $5.99. The question put by the chair that the bill be paid was adopted. So you can see they're summarizing the actions, but they put in quotes what the motion was, that the bill be paid. The chair, reporting on behalf of the membership committee, noted the enrollment of Dorothy Yetter as a provisional member, bringing a total membership to 6. So that was something on the chair's report. The report of the educational committee was read and placed in the file. This is in the next slide. Next paragraph, the special committee that was appointed to conduct youth outreach reported through its chairperson a resolution which, after debate and amendment, was adopted as follows. Resolved, $100 be allocated to purchase copies of Robert's Rules newly revised for distribution to high school parliamentary clubs. And then the final item noted in the minutes was the president introduced the guest speaker, Alice Bartelt, whose subject was expansion plans for the Oregon Association of Parliamentarians. It's a guest speaker, so the content and what the person said was not noted. And then that was the end of the meeting. And so it was noted that the meeting was adjourned at 8 p.m. and signed by the secretary. So you notice that there's nothing in there about, I object to us allocating $100. I don't think we should be doing that. We only have $105 and it would virtually bankrupt us. All the discussion and debate that went on regarding that motion was not included into it. It was just the results. And if someone had amended that to say, I move that we strike $100 and replace it with $50, and that passed, and then that motion would be noted as well. And the reason why is that a month is going to go by before this group meets again, and it's going to be hard remembering what transpired in the prior meeting, and especially if you look 2 or 3 months down the road when someone shows up with a receipt for $500 that they spent on copies of Robert's Rules of Order when it was only $100 that was authorized, then someone's going to have to deal with that, and you have to prove to the person that they overspent. We had a function here in Clatsop County where someone was authorized to spend $100 on refreshments. They went to Costco, they got all excited, and they spent $300. Well, the organization is under no obligation to pay the $200 that was not authorized, especially if you don't have the money in the till. I mean, what are you going to do? Any questions so far on minutes?
No, but I not exactly on what you're talking about. But there is an interesting statement here from Hop to it, and interesting to address, other than to say, well, we don't have anything better right now. But it says having a hard time believing that parliamentary procedures developed in the 19th century will still be in use at the end of this century. I mean, care to comment on that?
Well, they've actually been evolving since the 1200s. They started with Magna Carta, and then parliamentary procedure was evolved considerably in Parliament, hence the name. And then they were brought over by the British, who set up the colonies, and each of the states developed their own rules of order, even before the United States was formed. And then, of course, we had the parliamentary procedures that was set up for the constitutional conventions. And then Robert's Rules, ever since it was first published in 1875, undergoes revisions approximately every 10 years. So the last time it was revised was the 11th edition, which is around 12 years ago. And like we said earlier, the 12th edition is coming out in September. So they do examine the language, and certainly if new issues have cropped up that are not addressed in the prior edition, then they would add that. What you saw in the last edition was the emergence of rules around electronic meetings. I actually expect this to be an area where there will be a lot of focus, just because the rules around electronic meetings need to be codified so that everyone's rights are protected inside of meetings. But you can have them because they certainly are convenient. Like our Cascadia E-Unit, we're going to allow people for whom Portland is a 6-hour drive way, and it is not conceivable for them to regularly attend meetings in the Portland area, so they can attend these virtually. So I expect the electronic meeting rules to be evolved, and then of course anything else that has popped up since the last edition that need to be addressed, they will refine the language there.
Wow, that's a lot of information. Thank you. And Barbara said, yeah, only since the 1200s. Wow. Yeah, and I just want to say there are other methods of various rules of human beings just being organized, which is really all this is. DSA uses some new version that includes some other things that they think are more allow for more inclusivity in meetings. So there are variants, I like the fact that it's always evolving. The fact that we can do an e-group and they're doing the Kindle, that's awesome. Anyway, nice answer. Thank you, Larry.
So next slide. Practice of distributing advanced copies. So this is a area that takes up a couple of pages inside of Robert's Rules. So it's important to remember that minutes do not become the minutes and assume their essential status as the official record until they've been approved. And this is why it's so important for them to do this at the beginning of the meeting. Because once you approve it, then that becomes the record of what you did in the previous meeting. So the problem with advanced copies being distributed is that if they're corrected between the distribution of the draft minutes and the presentation of minutes for approval at the next regular meeting, then you have copies floating around that are inconsistent. And we saw that with the example I had from a couple of years ago, where the initial draft was issued, this bylaws change was not referenced. 3 months later, we pick up a copy of the prior meeting minutes, and then suddenly it's different than the draft minutes that were distributed. And unfortunately, no one noted on the minutes what had changed. So in my humble opinion, what should have happened is that we want the draft minutes sent out because there are a couple of beneficial aspects to that. People get to review the minutes when the activities that transpired in the meeting is still fresh in their mind. The second reason why is that people who were not able to attend the meeting, and this goes back to the fundamental principle of protecting the rights of members who were not in attendance, people who were not there get to read through the minutes and see what transpired. And if all they had was a set of draft minutes, it's certainly better than nothing. If they didn't have the draft minutes, they would never have known that a bylaws change had been proposed, and they would show up at the next meeting and have it presented to them. So what should have happened is that the draft minutes should have been distributed. It's fine if people look through them and remind the secretary of things that are incorrect or that were missed and should be added. However, the secretary needs to indicate what was changed between that and the draft minutes, so there's no confusion about what's going on. And then it's very clear, it's sort of an audit trail of what transpired to produce the minutes that are currently being approved, and then everyone feels like it's been conducted with complete transparency. When you start finding things changed and you're not being told about it, suddenly, and especially when it's things like a bylaws change, it starts feeling like it's not being done above board. So I'm a big fan of distributing minutes in advance. Even if people don't read them, at least they have the opportunity to read them. And the next slide, the recommendations for minutes, that's what I just went through. Recording devices. So I know, like at our local city council, the minutes or the discussion of the full meeting is recorded, and they're sent off to a service in Portland where some poor person puts on a headset and they transcribe everything that was uttered during the meeting. And if it was a 2-hour meeting, it's a lot of stuff. They can be used by the secretary and can be of great benefit to clarify what happened, but a transcription from the meeting should never be used as the minutes themselves. You end up with far too much information when all you want to do is look through and find out what the motions were, what passed and what failed, and basically how they were dispositioned. So correcting errors. You are not limited to just the minutes of being presented during the current meeting. If the existence of an error or material omission in the minutes becomes reasonably established after their approval, even many years later, the minutes can then be corrected by means of the adoption of amend something previously adopted, which requires a 2/3 vote or a majority vote with notice, or the vote of a majority of the entire membership or unanimous consent. So there's a bunch of ways in which things can be voted on. A lot of these are commonly repeated, and even though it looks complicated here, it's a commonly repeated set of thresholds that you have to meet in order to pass them. So it's really not as bad as it looks. But we could go back to the minutes from 2016, and if we could get 2/3 to agree, or unanimous consent at the next meeting, we go back and change it. It turns out that you cannot change a bylaws. You cannot rescind a bylaws change for any reason, and you can only move forward. So there would really be no value in going back and doing that. And final slide, I believe, is correcting misconceptions. So I've had people ask me some interesting things. There was one chair who felt that they had to review the secretary's work and change it if necessary. The secretary does not report to the chair. The secretary reports to the assembly by whom they were elected. So if in a typical deliberative assembly you elect a chair, a vice chair, a secretary, and a treasurer, you're not electing a hierarchy, and there's no reporting going on there. It's the chair, it's the secretary's responsibility to be responsible for the minutes, and it's perfectly fine to run a set of minutes by other people who are in the meeting, including the chair, saying, "Did I get these right? Did I miss anything?" If the chair remembers something that reminded the secretary of something, and the secretary believes that that's a more accurate version, then by all means they should correct the minutes so you have the best record of the meeting being presented for adoption possible. But the chair doesn't get to take control of the minutes. And even in the case where you have a inadequately performing secretary, unfortunately, that's who you elected, and that's the person that's responsible. And so if you have a problem with the minutes, you go to the secretary to get them fixed.
That's interesting, just an observation here, but it's quite, first of all, question, is there a list of the powers of the chair and the actual rights and roles, so that, because it sounds to me like we got a lot of chairs that think they're like a king or something, or a queen. Which is kind of anti-democratic, but you know that you and me know this. Chairs, like the issue you're dealing with right now is, no, I have the power to just say whatever. You don't, right? Is there a list?
Yes. So as in the hierarchy that we've talked about many times before, the foundational authority is the Robert's Rules of Order, Parliamentary Procedure, Rules of Order. So in the Rules of Order, you get there's a list of things that the chair does and the secretary does. You will not find reviewing the minutes in the chair's description. Then in the bylaws, which is where you can replace parts of Robert's Rules of Order with other things, you can further articulate things that you think is important for the chair or the vice chair or the secretary or the treasurer or anyone else to be responsible for, and that's where you would list it.
Yeah, that's great.
They don't get anything beyond what is listed. As John would say, you can't make shit up.
Right, which happens all the time in these damn meetings, unfortunately. Well, that's good. I think we should make some web pages with this information or print it out. I got an idea to talk to you about afterwards, an app for this. But hop to it. Interesting points. Just saying, it's Robert's Rules seems to require a high bar of specialized knowledge and diligence in order to prevent abuse, making it a poor system for ensuring trust outside of paid professional environments. And that's an interesting point. Once again, then it says having to constantly burn up volunteer energy just to train and monitor an inherently vulnerable system prevents allocating the energy elsewhere. What can I just say before you respond, Larry? What that really comes down to is not educating your citizens takes care of that. You see what I'm saying? That's what happens when you don't have educated citizens. Larry, your response?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we have to do that. The best solution is to elect good people in the first place so that you can trust. But it's kind of like the Ronald Reagan trust but verify. You do need to make sure, because even people with the best intentions make mistakes, and so they should be appreciative when they're corrected. As you can imagine, now that we're going into the 12th edition of Robert's Rules, it's gone from a fairly slim publication, and I don't have mine here, but it's now 1.5 inches thick. And as you read through it, there's the rules, and then there's all the exceptions to the rules, and all of those are developed because of things that have been encountered over time, and they had to make exceptions based on learnings. And it's unfortunate that they are as complex as they are. To become a registered parliamentarian, you take a battery of 5 exams, which are very, very tough, and they really delve into the nuances of how things are done. But it's the trade-off of having a lot of rules, but ensuring the widest application of democracy possible. Because all this is about is defending your rights inside a deliberative assembly.
Well said.
The final point. Go ahead.
Well, real quick, where are you on your? You're taking the exams. Where are you at in that process? Or are you done?
No, I'm taking exams 4 and 5 next Friday, and I'm taking 2 and 3 at the end of August, and I have to squeeze in number 1 somewhere, and I don't know how I'm going to do that yet. Number 1 should be the easiest of them to pass, because it's just looking up passages that are given to you in the book. But I want to do that before the new edition comes out, because then I have to refamiliarize myself with everything. I am at the starting gate. That's where I'm at.
Wow. Well, thank you for going through all that rigmarole for democracy.
The final point is, in the absence of a secretary pro tem should be elected. This is a big deal that's noted in the book. It's not the chair saying, "Hey, Josephine, the secretary's not here. Could you take notes for us today?" You actually, to adhere to the rules, you need to have the assembly elect someone to be the secretary because of the significance of what they're doing. So the final 2 slides are what you should do. So the first one is what you should do if you are a recording secretary. So hopefully we get some people that are interested in performing their role better. I encourage you to read the section on minutes and Robert's Rules and see what they say about them. I was earlier in my life, as a dismissive about Robert's Rules of Order. I thought exactly the same thing. How could something written over 100 years ago truly be applicable to what we're doing in our humble little group? And the more I familiarize myself with the information, the more I realize that they are an evolved set of rules, and there's a lot of wisdom embodied in them. Compare what Robert's Rules recommends against what you currently create. So if you're a secretary, you should have a couple of copies of minutes from your last couple of meetings. You can pull that out. You can compare that to what Robert's Rules talks about having, and you can find out if there are things that you're missing, and you can see if there are things that you're putting in that are overkill. And then, review it and cross out all the extraneous text. So if you happen to have been capturing the debate, all that you can scratch out, and then see how, what you end up with in terms of a document. And I would bet that unless you're doing all of this stuff correctly now, they will end up being a much more concise set of minutes that you can easily retrieve and find what you're looking for. I find 6 pages of verbiage very difficult to read through and find out what I'm really after. And it seems like every time I've done that in the past, not every time, but most of the times when I've done this in the past, the key pieces of information are not recorded.
I was going to say that you're dispelling one of the big misconceptions that I think I and many people had of the secretary role. I turn it down all the time because I'm like, 1, I suck at typing, and 2, it's going to be a shit ton of information to jot down. But really, it's not. You're not recording the details of conversations. You're just recording results. And I appreciate, to everybody out there who's afraid of being a secretary, it's really not a lot of typing,
And the key thing is that you get the words of the motion captured. That's the hardest thing, especially if someone is trying to make up a motion on the fly, which is a really, really bad practice. Because the words that you use are so important, you want to pick terminology that is unambiguous and clear, and then write that down and then hand it to the secretary. And then, so many of your problems would be avoided. So the final slide is what you should do if you are a member. So this is the part that I find exhausting, especially if you go to meetings that are 4 hours long. Try to keep your own notes from meetings, especially the wording of motions, because this is what you need to do to, if you don't have the greatest memory in the world, this is what you need when the minutes are proposed at the next meeting for approval. Secondly, keep copies of all the minutes to reference in the future. This is another one of my failings. I keep electronic copies and I don't print them out when I really should be printing them out, even though that kills trees. I should print them out and put them in a binder so I can quickly grab the binder and reference them. Otherwise, it just gets so difficult finding, where in your hard drive or your Google Drive you stored it, and then where the information you need is inside of them. Do not hesitate to correct errors when minutes are submitted for approval. One of the reasons why the next session is around practicing the verbiage in using rules of order is that talking about these things is kind of like exercising a muscle, and until you've done it a couple of times, it doesn't come out natural. But you should not hesitate. If you see something wrong in a set of minutes, and it's wrong shouldn't be like, oh, there should be a comma after, whatever. Really go for the battles that are worth fighting. But don't hesitate to correct errors when they're submitted for approval, especially if they have missed key concepts.
Grammar is a battle worth fighting for, Larry.
Thank you. And I would recommend anyone who's a member of a deliberative assembly move the adoption of a rule that draft minutes be distributed within X number of days of the meeting. You can do that. You can have a rule that says the secretary should distribute the draft minutes within 2 days or 5 days or 10 days or whatever you like. But I would highly recommend you to get the draft minutes distributed for everyone, because as it does the two things I mentioned previously, it informs people who are not able to attend what transpired, and it gives everyone an opportunity to review the minutes while the information is still relatively fresh in their head. Any final questions?
No, they're just having a discussion about using these rules, politics, and getting money out of politics, because then we really can do a lot more just in relation to rules. Nope, it's good. That's good. Well done, Larry.
Class is over, and we can adjourn. Thank you, everyone, for attending today.
Yes. I did want to say, for those of you that do these things and move to adopt a rule that draft minutes be distributed within 5 days of the meeting, which I actually think is a great idea. When they say we don't know how to do that, you be the person to volunteer to show them the world of Google Docs, and be the person to volunteer to put it there for them, because I know a lot of these places are not tech savvy in that regard. And we're going out with a tune. Is there anything else you want to talk about, upcoming events, Larry, or anything like that before we go out?
No, just that the lesson for next week has been changed to Saturday from Sunday. It'll be Saturday at 1 o'clock, I believe.
Saturday, 1 o'clock. Let me get the cover so you can tell everybody this is the cool one. No, it's not. Reclaiming Your Rights. Tell everybody what it's going to be about real quick.
I have 5 scenarios where we've written scripts, and what we're going to do is read through the scripts and sort of enact how the meeting would flow, so you can understand how these tools that we've been talking about can be used in real life situations. So if you want to know how to deal with a chair, like you can remove a chair, you can remove an appointed chair to a committee if they are refusing to do their job, the process for doing that. And so there's 5 scenarios that we're going to go through. So the first thing we're going to list is the rules that will be invoked in this discussion. And then Carrie Capon, the vice chair of the Rose City unit, will be one of the actors, and I will be one of the actors, and I believe Steve Bintliff has signed up, and then John, of course, will be one. And we will we will show you real life scripts on how these things would work inside a meeting. Because especially if you've never been to a meeting actually run under Robert's Rules of Order, you'll find it to be a little bit different than what you might normally be used to. I've attended meetings that are basically just gatherings where people get together and chat, and that is not how these meetings are to be run.
No, I mean, especially like throwing chairs. Brom goes, what if we want to throw a chair? So maybe you should add that, if somebody makes that up, or what happens if it gets rowdy, what do you do? But I just want to say everybody loves the discussion. They say, thank you, Larry. Wonderful. This is great information. Really appreciate it. So yeah, I hope to see you all next Saturday at 1. This is going to be a fun one. And can you address the chair thing, Larry? We should write a scenario.
Well, I think we have. It's not throwing a chair, but it's a summarized version of a situation we had where people deviated from discussing things in terms of ideas and concepts and resorted to name calling. And you don't have to put up with that crap. That's like a verbal chair throw. So the chair of the meeting is responsible for maintaining decorum and ensuring that people are civil and polite to each other. So if the chair is not doing that, you can make the chair do it. And there's also things that you can say yourself to invoke it. And if the person doesn't behave, you can move that person be ejected from the meeting. And so we'll be going through that scenario.
Awesome. Well, that's exciting. And that's great.
It is.
And it's going to be fun. And Brom, even if only Nevada throws chairs, this information works across states, right? So, if you're in Nevada, please join the conversation. Thank you very much, Larry. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Going to go out with Sharon Stone and the Dap Kings, This Land Is Your Land, which is a much better version than the original, in my opinion. We never get to hear the... What, Larry?
I don't think it's Sharon Stone.
Jones. Sharon Jones. I'm reading.
Correct.
My eyes are terrible. Sharon Jones. Dap Kings. Sorry.
Yes, I love that version.
Yes. We got to get Bernie on this one for his tour because they did the other one a lot last time. Anyway, we never get to hear the whole song with Laura Livengood in Progressive California, which needs to start back up. Hello, California Progressives. Be on the show. Until then, here's the song. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And join us, what does it say, Sunday? So join us Wednesday for our next strategy session. Oh, we got so much data. So much fun data. Thank you.
This land is your land. This land is my land. From California, well, to the New York Island. From the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. I tell you, this land was made for you and me. As I went walking down that ribbon of a highway, I saw beneath all that endless skyway. Now I saw below me that golden valley, and I said, this land was made for you and me. As I was walking, now they tried to stop me. They put up a sign that said, oh, it said private property. Well, on the backside, it said nothing. So it must be that side was made for you.